It looks like we have a few last people still entering the room, so I'll give everyone a second to find a seat. But in the meantime, welcome to Chatham House. I'm really delighted to see so many of you here, and we also have a great audience online. So as some of you may know, I'm Marion Messmer. I'm the director of the International Security Program here at Chatham House, and I'm really delighted to welcome you all tonight to hear from Oana Țoiu, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Romania. So before we begin, I just wanted to remind everyone that this conversation is being live streamed and is on the record. So if you wanted to post on social media about the event, you can. Please use the hashtag #CHEvents and tag us if you do so. We are about to hear from the Minister. While you listen, please think of questions that you may want to ask. If you are in the room, you can raise your hand, and once I call on you, one of my colleagues will come to you with a microphone. Please introduce yourself briefly and then state your question. And if you are joining us online, then please put your question in the Q&A box, and I will pick a few questions to read out on your behalf. Now, without further ado, I'm really delighted to introduce Oana Țoiu, who is, as I mentioned, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Romania. She previously served as the Vice President of the Chamber of Deputies, where she was also President of the Labour and Social Protections Committee of the Romanian Parliament. And the Minister is going to speak to us for about 10 minutes, followed by a question and answer session, first with some questions of myself and then questions from the audience. So please join me in welcoming the Minister.
Much here or here?
You can do your remarks up there if you like, and then sit back down.
Thank you. It is such an honor to be here today with you, although I have nothing new to say. And I know that that sounds like a disastrous start of a conversation, but it is true. I think the power of this conversation is not necessarily in saying something new, but rather in reaffirming what we already know, which is that we're here together, standing as an international community. We're here together as, in my case, a representative of Romania, to stand by Ukraine in their effort, in their extraordinary courage, resilience, perseverance, in their extraordinary moment of history where they're always mixing this realistic perception of the risk and of the war they're part of the tragedies of the everyday conflict, but also of the hope and of the future plans and how they design the future in the same time as they protect their survival. But maybe the part of the power we're having, it's exactly the fact that this is not something new. We are 4 years into a war that was announced by Russia to be won in 3 days. They have been 500 times mistaken. It's 1,500 days almost since that moment. So it's not that they've been a little mistaken or that they have overestimated a little what their power was. But they are 500 times more apart from the actual reality. And part of that is, of course, first of all, the resilience, the courage, and the power of the Ukrainian people. But then together with that, what we have managed to do as an international community. Now, that being said, I don't want to create too much glory on where we are, because we're not where we are supposed to be either. We are not at the moment where children there feel safe. We're at the moment where maternity leaves are targeted, although there is no one in the world that can say that women giving birth can actually possess a threat to someone. So every rule has been broken by Russia. You have workers that were just commuting to work that have been targeted directly. And what is happening now with the energy grid in having old people or people that are undergoing different medical treatments freezing in their homes, that again is absolutely unexcusable and something that should never have happened in an international community that has worked so long to create rules that we can rely on, that has worked so long to create institutions that we can have a dialogue in a diplomatic format, and yet here we are. Now, I have come to also share a bit the perspective of where we stand as a neighboring country, as the longest border with the war, the longest NATO border, European Union and Schengen border to the war. And we stand by our neighbors, helping in any way we can, obviously part of the international effort as well, but also acknowledging that the task at hand needs even more pressure and needs even more support for the resilience there. And also, one message that I want to put forward is the fact that if we look at the history of Ukraine, and we have watched it carefully as neighbors, it is quite clear that Russia has tried first to conquer the country by taking over their democracies with instruments that were outside democratic rules. They have reached this moment of actual military conflict, even back since Crimea 2014, because they have failed with the other instruments that they have tried. Now, why do I mention that? Is because I think we need to be aware that in many parts across the world, there is an ongoing hybrid interference, as we have acknowledged within the common NATO statement, actually initiated by the United Kingdom last year. And there is an ongoing hybrid challenge where we must coordinate as an international community as well to be able to find the proper instruments to prevent that, but to also to have the proper instruments to increase the resilience of our societies, to increase the resilience of our democracy. And here, of course, we can also lean back into the lessons that Ukraine has learned, into the lessons that Moldova has learned, into the lessons that we have learned in Romania. And we're actually, by the end of this month, going to sign a trilateral agreement in terms of sharing our lessons in that and to be able to advance in our cyber security instruments, the way our teams are learning of what are the threats, the risks, and how we can put forward part of that learning as our contribution to the international community as well. So that is one message. And another message on our side is that it is very important also together that we keep the economic system going for Ukraine, and that we create the leverage and the pressure to diminish the profits that Russia is currently creating and has the ability to flow back into their war machine. Now, that for us means that we have moved last year to very concrete, definite punishments if you go around sanctions. Before the beginning of our term in government, if you would go around the sanctions we have imposed against Russian oligarchs or Russian businesses, you would be faced with a financial fine. Now, since we've started the term, we've been able to deliver this in Parliament as well, you actually face prison time. And we believe that to be the proper discouragement that is needed. So that's one factor. And also, we have been strong supporters of the increase in the sanction packages, of the alignment between the sanctions of like-minded partners, allies, the sanctions we're developing in the European Union, and where it is possible to align that with the sanctions of G7 or United States, because we believe that is the way to create the proper pressure going forward. And in that sense, something that we can also continue doing and do better is to make sure that once we stop the energy flows from Russia in terms of the demand that comes also from the countries here, then that we shouldn't just use as a temporary instrument now as we have the war going on. It should be an intense instrument to pressure in this period of time. But also once we realign the commercial flows, once we realign the logistical pathways, it is very important that we create that as a continuous economic flow that goes around Russia, essentially. So we're able to create the financial, so that we're able not to allow them to gain the financial resources that then would feed into the defense industry, well, in their case, their war industry as such. So that is the second part, and what we're working on is investments to have a better energy grid with Moldova and Ukraine. What we're working on is to advance the role we're having as Romania in the vertical corridor, for example, to be able to allow for the energy sources such as LNG coming from the United States to be an alternative to the countries that are now or have been until now buying Russian gas and Russian oil. So the economic part is very important, and here we actually welcome the announcement that President Zelensky has made in terms of the export that they're willing to, the exports that they're willing to develop in the defense industry, because we think when we are speaking about Ukraine that we need to look there also in terms of the resources that they have developed and what we all have to learn in terms of air defense capability, something that we need on the eastern flank and that we're working more together to coordinate, to have in terms of financing, but also in terms of better collaboration among us, the states on the eastern flank. And on a final note, before we go to questions and answers, we are hosting in Bucharest the B9 summit in the second half of May. President Nicu Șordan has announced this, and we believe this is going to be a key moment to be able to share among the leaders of the B9 countries and also the other countries on the eastern flank being invited, what are the plans ahead and the lessons learned, and feed those lessons into the NATO summit in Ankara this summer. But the last thing is also, again, because we are in this special space, and there are not many organizations in the world that are in the same time both with such a rich history as you have more than a century of thought leadership, and are in the same time relevant for the present moment and relevant for where the future takes us. And with that lesson of your strong leadership of Chatham House, I think we can go into the next phase of the conversation where we need to do the same. We need to be mindful and clear-eyed about the lessons that history has taught us, especially as a country that has parts of our history with Russia, parts of our history that I wouldn't say are reported as being full of joy by those that have lived them. We need to look into the lessons that history teaches us, and one of them is we should never be naive when it comes to Russia, but also in the same time have a future perspective, have the optimism that is generated by this international community that has similar hopes, that has acted in a united manner, and that obviously 500 times longer than Russia expected has proved that it doesn't give up.
Thank you so much, Minister. So I think there was so much there in your remarks, but I just wanted to pick up on a few of the things that you mentioned and perhaps go a little more deeply into that before we open it up to everyone in the room and online. You mentioned the threat to democracy that Russia poses and the various instruments of power that Russia has been using, first in Ukraine and also increasingly in Europe. So I wanted to ask you where you think the biggest risks are coming from, especially for European states, when we look at Russia and when we look at this year and what we need to be ready for?
Well, I think it's self-evident in the case that the biggest risk is their war of aggression, their unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine. And we also always need to remind ourselves and remind our citizens that the sacrifice, the effort, the leadership that Ukraine has in this also has as an effect the fact that our security is increased through that, because that is the biggest risk, not necessarily in terms of territorial challenge, because here I'm a strong believer in NATO and in the power of deterrence that Article 5 has, in the power we have collectively to create the proper deterrence on the eastern flank, and also what is a responsible decision that we have taken at the Hague Summit to increase our commitment for budget allocation for our own defense, where we're now modernizing our military, modernizing our defense industry. But I think it is the highest risk because any type of advancement that they have there, anything that they consider that they're winning through this process, indirectly creates the encouragement that they will repeat in the future this pattern. And I've been clear on this even since then. I think the international reaction we had in 2014 after Crimea hasn't been strong enough. And I think if it would have been strong then, maybe we wouldn't be today where we are.
That makes sense. And you mentioned the Ukrainian defense industry that has grown quite strong. You mentioned the efforts in The Hague to increase defense spending. What priorities is Romania setting when it comes to defense modernization? And where do you see opportunities for cooperation with NATO allies?
Yes, I think here we have managed to have a fast-paced modernization of our military and of our defense industry. We are not yet at the final process of that. So much still needs to be done in the year and in the years ahead. But we have the resources to allocate in that direction, not just in terms of our own budget and the decisions we have taken in that direction, but also in terms of the SAFE, which is a financing mechanism within the European Union, where Romania has secured the second allocation after Poland, 16.8 billion, and we believe that to be a very clear instrument for us to accelerate what we need to do, not just in terms of procurement, but especially in terms of modernizing our defense industry together with international like-minded partners, obviously part of our allies. So we're able to also create through this process good paying jobs, which I think is an imperative for all of us in our communities. And also to create through this process the common projects in the defense industry that allow for the economic flow needed. Because, and I think this is the case not just for Romania, but maybe for other countries, part of the allied effort to step up our budgets to 5% of the GDP. We need to be able to do that without affecting the investments that are needed in education, the investments that are needed in healthcare, the investments that are needed in our social structure and other public services that we're having. And in order to make that possible, you need to also have economic flows that allow for those resources to at least partially be generated through them.
Yeah, I think that's one of the areas where everyone in Europe is unfortunately struggling a little and trying to figure out how to find their way through it. So it will be interesting to see how Romania is solving it and how others can do that as well. You mentioned hybrid threats a little, and that's of course something that we're seeing increasing across Europe. So how do you think we can increase our resilience to hybrid threats across NATO, and how is Romania thinking about this challenge?
There are many parts of the answer to your question, but I think one thing that is important is to name and recognize them as such. And although that seems very simple, that seems the baseline of it all, I don't think we are yet there everywhere. Because it's not so easy as to recognize a gun or as to recognize a drone flying into your airspace or a ship in your territorial waters. It's not as easy in the online space as it is in the offline space to recognize the threat or to recognize the author of that threat. Also because it doesn't pose such an imminent danger sometimes, or it's not seen as posing such an imminent danger, I don't think it was always high on the list of priorities. And we're gradually realizing that we need to coordinate among ourselves in terms of what we see, of the analysis that we have, in terms of what are the instruments to increase the resilience in our societies, be it critical thinking, be it fact-checking instruments, be it very practical cyber resilience when it comes to cyber threats. And here in Romania, we also have a strong cybersecurity community. Also in the private arena, we have companies that have proved to be very strong in that arena and have expanded globally and provide solutions across the world. So we can rely on that. At the institutional level, we are hosting some of the strongest European teams and competence centers in that direction as well. And we're advancing our partnerships with, as I was mentioning, Moldova and Ukraine, because we believe, obviously, we see common patterns in those hybrid interferences.
Yeah, makes sense. One of the threats that I think we are particularly not used to having to deal with is physical sabotage, right? You mentioned the difficulty in attribution. I think this is also something that's incredibly difficult to attribute. Is Romania prioritizing defense of, for example, energy, infrastructure, anything like that when it comes to physical assets?
Yes, and for example, part of our diplomatic efforts throughout this year have been on coordinating more of the Black Sea, because that's where we have a very important energy project, the Neptune Deep. We are currently the #1 natural gas producer within the European Union, and with the resources there, we are almost going to double the amount that we're able to provide for our internal market to lower the energy prices, but also to allow for the resource that's going to be needed when we step more into the industries of the future. Anything that is AI and that is data center is also huge consumer of energy, but also provided for the region to decrease practically the instruments that others have to use energy as a weapon. Now, that being said, it doesn't mean we have done everything that needs to be done. This is a category where we're still investing, still learning, we still have to develop capabilities.
Makes sense. I think we're all still learning on this, and there's a lot of NATO exchange on this point. One of the areas where we've seen quite a lot of Russian influence take place is in the Western Balkans. And of course, Romania, due to its geographic position and strong relationships, has done quite a lot in helping counter Russian influence. Do you think there are any lessons that you can share with the rest of us in Europe that we can take on?
Yeah, so first of all, if there are Romanians in the room or watching the conversation, when they hear you say, we have done quite a lot and what are the lessons we are sharing with the world, I think they would raise an eyebrow, not in underestimating the effort or the amazing success that our society has had in protecting the European path of our democracy, but rather because we also acknowledge that we are still facing those interferences. We also acknowledge that we still have to build up our institutions. We still have to build up our coordination and our answer. And our president, Nicu Șordan, has been very clear on what he put forward in the conversation with our society, but also in the international formats among world leaders, essentially, which is to acknowledge together that there is a learning path that we're on, that there is still a debate in terms of how we all practically put our instruments together, how we are able to corroborate what we are learning. But the fact that we need to acknowledge the threat as it is and we need to respond to it, I think that's very important. And here I think Romania is in a place where we can share that with other countries. And also we have shared the report at the leaders level in terms of what the judicial system has put forward. And also our president has been again very clear on the fact that he is willing to put forward a more detailed report, so that is available to the Romanian society, but also to the community that needs to be able to learn from that.
Thank you. I think we'll now open it up to questions from the audience. I see one hand up already. See, my colleagues are just grabbing the mic. So if we could go to the gentleman in the middle here first. Thank you.
So thank you very much. I'm Angelo. I'm an independent analyst. So I would say that until 4 years ago, the EU was considered a political economic power where Brussels, Berlin, and Paris were the center of the system. And then there were some regions which were considered somehow to be peripherals, like the Mediterranean, the Eastern region, and the Balkans. So in the recent years, we have understood the geopolitical relevance of the so-called peripheral countries, like Finland, Estonia, Poland, of course, Romania. So how do you think that the balance of political and economic power in the EU will change after the war? So how these recent years will have an impact on the future of the EU distribution of power and, economic relevance and all the attention. Thank you.
Thank you. You have mentioned analysis and a lot of labels about countries. Who those analyses belong to?
Sorry.
You have mentioned analysis and used a lot of labels about different countries, and I was wondering What's the basis for that?
There was perception. I mean,
Of whom?
I would say perception of media, social perception that the economic, the political powers was all concentrated in some source of power, which were located in the more institutional. I mean, I'm from Italy, so I understand that there was a period also before the war where the attention was only given to certain part of Europe. And now we all understand that there are other regions that we have to pay attention also to, I'd say, somehow consider peripheral countries. So this is my reflection, how this will impact in the future of the EU. And I would hope that this would lead to a more heterogeneous distribution of attention, of relevance.
When you say peripheral, you mean from a geographic point of view?
Yeah, from a geographic point of view, but yeah, and political point of view also.
In what sense, political point of view? I'm trying to understand, because the question is based on a set of assumptions that I don't think they're universally shared among us here.
I don't know. This is at least my perception, so I can talk by myself, but I'm just trying to understand how these recent developments will have an impact also in the future after the conflict.
So I think we have different economies. Within the European Union, you have economies that are larger, and you have economies that are medium, or we have different paces in which our economies grow. For example, in the case of Romania, since the 90s until today, our GDP has increased 10 times. Since we joined the European Union, our GDP tripled. Now, we are not the top economy of the European Union, but if you look at the speed of growth of our economy, then again, the order is quite different. When you speak about the power that each country has within the European Union, then obviously you have different formats. In the European Parliament, for example, where the number of citizens is very relevant, we're the 6th country. When you look at when our prime ministers, or in our case, our president, represent us in terms of decisions, then you have an equality of decisions among them. If you look at different technical files and negotiations, of course, here, there is also the matter of the actual negotiation influence that everyone has, and here the size of the market matters, the integration of the industries matter. But what I think is happening now is, first of all, if you look at the EU membership benefits, I think it's a net positive for every member of the European Union. So I think irrespective of where you are in the size of your economy, if you look at the decision to join the European Union or to stay in the European Union. I didn't mean to go that way, but
I don't know what you might be referring to.
I realized in the middle of the phrase. So if you join the European Union, or if you decide to stay in the European Union, I think it's quite clear, especially from a financial point of view or an economic point of view, that that is a positive decision for the country and therefore for its citizens. If we are to look into the future, I think here as well, if you look at the dynamic in the world and the fact that the relationship between big countries has become more complicated. Again, I think a stronger coordination within the European Union and the fact that we negotiate as a bloc creates more power. And I think this is important. That makes us a stronger negotiation partner, and I think we need to use that. And I have been very clear in my political career on that. And now, once we see this trade deals advancing, we need to look at them not just from an economic perspective, but also from a geopolitical perspective. And I think this is important. And that's also, for example, why I think it matters and it makes sense that we support the project of an enlarged European Union, not just because that means we're in a competition for the aspirations of the citizens of the countries around us. It's a competition between different futures. And I think it matters that we invest in that competition in a future that the Western Balkans or Moldova or Ukraine, the countries that want to join the European Union, see as possible, see as within reach, and that is a European future. And I think it makes sense for Romania as well to be a partner for these countries and to be a strong voice for the enlargement, not just because we know what would mean if others would enlarge their sphere of influence, but also because we have our own experience. When we joined the European Union, we didn't have the perfect institutions. We still don't have the absolute perfect institutions. But we are a story that proves that once you do the work, once you make sure you have most of the criteria, then within the European Union, it's easier to go on that path, to grow on that path, to have the transformation needed for the institutions, the overall instruments that you need. And also that the work is never done. And I'm not saying that just on behalf of my country. I think we all realize that it's not a threshold that you pass and then you're there irrespective of what happens. It's an ongoing work that we need to do.
Yeah.
And also one thing that I want to add, because I was having the conversation this morning with a couple of journalists. Now, I also think we've created this complex structure with different levels of decision, where something that was possible throughout time was that you had national politicians, and I say this as a politician, I don't say this as at arm's length from politicians, have been very fast to take credit for achievements, and that makes sense, because you work for them, you're part of the decision, but have been reluctant to speak on behalf of the decisions, of the European decisions that have been more complicated. And that, in a sense, in some cases has created this idea that the European Union is sometimes something distant from the member states themselves or from the power of the national politicians themselves. Whereas I think it's very important and the responsible thing to do to say this is a decision, this is a group where the decisions we're taking have everyone at the decision table. Now, not with equal power in terms of the economy, not with equal influence, not with equal history, but still, it is one decision that is taken in formats where everyone participates in this decision. And with this strong wave of, let's say, stronger stance on saying countries should be more independent nationally, and I'm a strong supporter of national identity, being a strong negotiator for your national interests. But still, if you look at countries in our region that are not part of the European Union and have not given through the treaties any common or shared responsibility on decisions, they want to join the European Union. They don't want to go the other way. So I think that speaks very clearly on why that creates more value. And the one thing that I think it's very important if we are to compare with, let's say, other big powers in our region, I think it's the European Union has this power of attraction, which very few big powers have, because first of all, they're not all open, that's one thing, and then the model of the economy, as imperfect as it is, the model of the way we've built up our social services, public services and all that, as imperfect as they are, with all the work that still needs to be done, I think it still creates an attraction factor for the countries in the region that we need to use by speeding up the enlargement opening negotiation clusters decisions.
Thank you very much. Now for a question from the online audience, which I think is, is one that's often been discussed this year already because it's been quite a big year for European security. How ready would you say European states are to defend themselves? And what do you think are priorities that European states need to tackle?
So I think, as I've been saying on behalf of my country, we've realized that we need to be very serious about our own reforms, about our own defense industry, about the budgets that we allocate. What we are seeing now is also a lot of effort at the political, at the diplomatic, but also at the NATO level to integrate more of what we're doing on the eastern flank, and I think this is very important. Something that I need to acknowledge is if you look at the eastern flank from the Black Sea to the Nordic, we need more political coordination at the Black Sea, even if it's more complicated, to be able to balance these points of the eastern flank, in terms of representation at least. But if the underlying question is whether Europe can defend itself without the rest of the allies in NATO, here I'm a strong supporter of NATO, and I'm a strong supporter of the transatlantic partnership.
Thank you. I'll just add a second question from online because it's related to what you just said. How is Romania prioritizing Black Sea security cooperation, and what would you say are the most important next steps for Black Sea security?
Yeah. So we're working with the other countries at the Black Sea, specifically with Bulgaria and Turkey for a common demining operation, also with Ukraine a lot. Ukraine is doing a lot of work on demining. And I think that is not mentioned enough in terms of their contribution to also keep the commercial lanes on the Black Sea safe. We have started to pay more attention to the way we are monitoring and what we need to invest to protect in the future as well the undersea infrastructure. We think this is very important. And although, again, if you look at the Black Sea compared with there are not yet so many things that have developed in terms of undersea infrastructure, but we believe that is something that will definitely going to develop even more in the future. And we also see these areas being essential in terms of commercial flows, but also in terms of essential corridors. So we want to invest more in that and also create the political coordination for that to be possible, and the military coordination. For example, in the last NATO Ministerial, Romania was the country that initiated what we hope to keep as a continuous format, and we've had it in the past as well, a trilateral meeting with the ministers from Bulgaria and Turkey to be able to advance at that level what we want to do together as well. And we are actually paying attention, and it's very important for us to talk to countries that include the Black Sea in their defense and security strategy, in their strategic approach. Your own strategy that came out this summer mentions it, and we think this is something important. France as well. We recently have a European Union strategic approach to the Black Sea, and Romania has been one of the countries that have pushed forward for that to happen. And we want to see, as fast as possible, the needed resources from the European Commission, together, of course, with our own investments, to make the European Union security hub at the Black Sea operational. Now it's an idea in a strategy. We've done our part to put forward the concept. We've done our part to secure part of the financing that is needed, but the Commission needs to be more serious in moving from a strategy concept that we currently have into something that is actionable.
Thank you. Okay, back to the room. We have a few people who have been waiting very patiently, so I'll go to the gentleman in the third row, this block here. Thank you.
Taken an awful lot of notes, thank you. The name's Ewan Grant, UK Defence Forum. I was a founding member of the EU BAM mission in Kyiv and then in Chisinau, so I've seen how things evolve, and I did put a copy of Tom Clancy on the desk in the EU delegation just after Crimea and said, I think you should read this book. But my question is based on, I think, a factor which has been far too often ignored, that many people, particularly in further west, and particularly UK, don't realise that you're a Latin-speaking nation. You're a boundary nation between the Slavs and the Latin speakers, with huge implications. So who is listening to your message at nation-state level across the western and southern parts of the EU? And perhaps more importantly, who isn't listening to you? I noticed there was an awful lot, very little said among human rights groups and anti-corruption groups about the collapse of the UN mission in Eastern DRC about a year ago, where, of course, there were Moldovan recruited mercenaries around. So I think more people need to listen much more closely to what Romania is saying. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. And also thank you to all of you that have come this evening to listen to what we have to say and have an open conversation. I would say, though, maybe this is different throughout my term, but I would say, though, that now one of the things that is happening, because we're all acutely aware of the risk posed by the aggression war that Russia started unprovoked against Ukraine, that we have created a space where we speak with each other quite often, where we listen to each other quite often. I do not feel necessarily that there is a lack of attention or a lack of openness to our perspective. Actually, I would say that the Security Council and the General Assembly in September at the United Nations was one of those moments where it was clear from the ministers of foreign affairs and prime ministers and presidents present there how clear they are on the fact that they pay attention to the risks that Romania faces, on the fact that they pay attention to the fact that we are part of this international solidarity where we see that the risk posed on one requires a diplomatic answer from all of us, but also better coordination and a clear deterrence factor among NATO and among allies. And I think there have been many countries there that have spoken clearly on behalf of the peace that we need on Ukraine, but also on behalf of the eastern flank countries that have faced our own, let's say, challenges in that respect. And Romania has been named many, many times by the leaders of these countries, UK as well. And that has been one of the moments where it was clear how strong our conversation is, how strong the attention that we pay to each other is. And also what we've seen in formats such as NATO, the European Commission, but also formats that we're co-initiators of, such as the trilateral I mentioned at the Black Sea, or to name a format that's very dear to me, the Odessa Triangle, which is the trilateral format between Romania, Ukraine, and Moldova. Now I think it's the first time I say it publicly, we're meeting now in Munich. We have our next trilateral Odessa Triangle meeting in Munich to share our common perspective. We've done the same in Vienna a couple of months ago. And even in these formats that we co-initiate, or the regional formats that we're part of, I think we also play this special role as being members of the European Union, but also part of the Balkans, part of understanding the countries at the east of the European Union and the path that they want to go on. We have this year the presidency of the Central European Initiative, where we want to use this platform throughout the year together with Italy. We're going to be in Trieste marking 3 decades since the beginning of this initiative. I've spoken with Antonio Tajani in Washington now this week to prepare for the event as well, because we want to use this platform to make sure we use the fact that we're members of the European Union, but also part of our region, to advance what we see further in terms of integrating more in terms of security, but in terms of economic and logistical flows as well.
Thank you. And I'll also just quickly throw in a question from the online audience, just because it also relates to the Munich Security Conference. Someone asked what you are hoping for from the Munich Security Conference.
Oh, I would hope for it to be boring.
Well, I think it won't be.
I know, no, that was a personal note. No, but I think because the transatlantic partnership is in the spotlight of the Munich Security Conference, and I've spoken with many people from Congress, the United States is going to have one of the largest, if not the largest, delegation at the Munich Security Conference. There are many leaders across the world being present there, and I'm meeting a lot of my fellow ministers of foreign affairs. I think it's going to be a very important moment in time to address what we see together as challenges and how we coordinate from a security point of view, but also to have an open format where we can discuss what we see differently. And I think this is going to be focused quite a lot on the online space, for example.
Thank you. Okay, a few more questions from the room. We've got a gentleman at the very back of the room. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Human. I'm a PhD researcher on financial crime. I focus on Russia, China, and others. How does Romania's current policy framework address financial crime and sanction evasions linked to Russia, and how is this integrated into the country's broader strategy for deterrence and security on NATO's eastern flank? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mentioned briefly in my initial statements, but I welcome the opportunity to expand a bit more on that. So we have a European Union decision that's transformed into a directive to be able to have the interinstitutional collaboration, to be able to monitor what is happening in that space, but also in terms of those that want to elude the sanctions, to be able to have the proper consequences in place. And the way we look at consequences is not necessarily from the angle of a punishment, but rather from the angle of a discouragement factor. Because we think it's very important that the potential cost that you face if you try to organize to elude sanctions is high enough so that it discourages you from doing that. And one of the first things I did when I took over my term in June is to assess a bit what we've been doing in that direction and to increase with a new law supported by the government and recently voted by a huge majority in our parliament, and that is a law that creates clearer and tougher consequences, including potential jail time if you create an organized system to go around sanctions. And we believe that will continue to act as a discouragement factor. So that's one thing. Another element that is important to mention in terms of sanction, and here again, I think the important work that UK has done in the United States and us in the European Union collectively, we welcome the sanctions posed by UK and the sanctions posed by the United States on Lukoil and Rosneft, because we see they operate in Romania as well. And I have put forward together with my fellow ministers of economy and energy, again, the legal changes that are needed to be able to monitor the way that they operate in such a way that we do not allow for the financial flows generated to go back as profits into Russia and then potentially into the war at our border. And we think this is a moment in time where this international pressure can act as a catalyzer for those assets to be sold to more like-minded companies from like-minded countries.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question in the front.
Cemil Gürsel, Chatham House member. Minister, the question is in relation to what the Vice President of European Commissioner last week on the 6th of February. She says as follows: stop fighting. Wars end when one side runs out of money. The question I'm asking you, do you agree with this? Secondly, what is the view of Romania in relation to this statement? Thank you.
I agree on the fact that the common strategy that we have established, the twofold strategy, which is to support the resilience of Ukraine and increase the pressure on Russia, is a strategy that we need to continue. Now, in terms of increasing the pressure on Russia, I think the instrument that we have at hand is the financial instrument. I mean, not just that, we need to, and we have done work to look into the visa, the sanctions, but the sanctions themselves act as an instrument to decrease the financial resources that they're having. We have seen the oil cap price as an instrument that worked, maybe not fast enough, maybe not strong enough as we would have wanted, so that's why we've gradually increased that pressure, and we have welcomed other countries across the world that have done the same. When we say we increased, I refer now to the European Union as a whole. Now I think the next sanction package with tougher decisions on specifically maritime component to it, I think that can have an add-on response. I also have been very clear on this in Washington as well when I've been, now that I think we can create a stronger effect if we have alignment with the United States when possible on these sanctions. So yeah, I think that is something that needs to continue. If you can do it faster and tougher, that's a conversation, an ongoing conversation, because everyone in the same time, especially across the world when we engage with our international partners, conveys back to us the message of their responsibility towards their own economy. So I think here we need to engage with international partners to also convince them when possible to join the sanctions, and therefore the pressure we collectively put on Russia and on Russia's financial resources, and in the same time be able to give them alternatives. Energy is maybe at the top of this list.
Thank you. Any other questions from the room? I've got one here.
Thank you very much, Minister. My name's Nicholas. I'm a master's student at King's College London.
Hi.
And I wanted to ask you, how does Romania see, you mentioned during your speech the threat of hybrid attacks by Russia against European democracies. We saw this in your own country last December in the first round of the presidential elections, and this summer and fall in neighboring Moldova, where Russia spent an exorbitant amount of money to try to overthrow the pro-Western government.
And failed?
Yes, thankfully. My question to you is, what lessons can Romania and the EU at large learn from Russia's failure in Moldova, and what work remains to be done so that a similar scenario can't be repeated, not just in European Union countries, but in candidate countries where Russia still does have a lot more influence, for example, in the Balkans or in Armenia, which has elections in a couple months. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I think Russia sees the European Union and NATO as direct challenges to their potential of expansion. So I think it's not just a one try, and if they fail, they stop. It's rather an ongoing strategy. It's an ongoing deployment of different tactics. I think we're going to see them continue to allocate resources in this direction. Therefore, on our part, I think we need to have this international coordination. I think we need to develop with the resources that we have common instruments to prevent that. I think we need to be transparent on, as much as it's possible, on what we see happening in our informational spaces. But also something that I think it's important to mention, maybe it's a bit of a more philosophical approach, but I think this is the right group of people to have that conversation with, which is the need to make sure there is also a very clear line between what is considered enemy interference, fake accounts, AI amplified algorithm with bots, and all that content that is disingenuous, is not connected to a human person or an actual opinion, because freedom of expression is something that citizens have a right to, not algorithms or AIs or fake bots. In the same time, I come from a country in which the generation of my parents has literally fought sometimes with their life, and they have risked their freedom through the revolution to be able to gain freedom of expression, to be able not to be censored in what they say, to be able to not to be thrown into prison because of what they think or what they say or what they put into, in their case, it wasn't the online space, but it was like poems, letters, open conversations, radio. And now at our embassy here in London, I was walking with our ambassador through the hallways. We have a permanent exhibition, which is with pictures from those moments in time in the 90s when people were speaking out their dreams. And one of those pictures, it's famous in Romania. It's with two young students that have written on a piece of paper, "Our children will be free." That was the core aspiration of that generation. And I am part of the children of that generation. So I think here it's very important that we have a continuous conversation with our societies in which they understand that their right for opinions, irrespective of how uncomfortable they are, is protected, is guarded, and it's separated from what we want in terms of making sure that fake accounts, fake bots, are not allowed to grow with no limit, no regulation. And I think here this is something that, irrespective of how we create the rules within our countries, there are some basic principles that I think we can all agree on. I think we all want to protect our children, and we do understand that a lot of these online spaces have risks and threats for them unless we act as guardians to what they can do there, how much time is allowed there, how the algorithms use their emotion and their time there. I think we can all agree that we need to protect also our citizens, not just from interferences in the democracies, but even from these very basic direct threats that come from fake content and online organized crime, fake advertising that leads you to transfer your well-earned salary into accounts that don't exist, personalities that are used with AI-generated content that do not actually endorse specific products or specific platforms. So I think here it's very important that we together continue that conversation, because I think we agree on the basic principles and the goal, but in terms of instruments of regulation, I think here also in the transatlantic relationship, we're going to see a lot of conversations being developed in the future.
Thanks. Yeah, really good point. I mean, I've been thinking a lot in my work about what the role of values is in foreign policy, right? Especially for an actor like the EU, and I think that's a really important point to put freedom of speech so centrally, since that's something that we can all agree on. Just to add another question from our online participants. Yeah. So the Black Sea and Black Sea security has come up, of course, quite a lot in your remarks and in the Q&A throughout the Q&A already. And one of our online audience members was wondering what lessons you think we can learn from the Black Sea for the Baltic Sea, for the Mediterranean, for essentially the other maritime spaces in NATO.
So I think even the question itself is of great value, and thank you to the person that has put it forward, because we need to also coordinate more on what we do on these different seas. And here we have had in September at the United Nations a panel on maritime security, where many of us came from different continents, different realities, very different formats on how we handle maritime security. We're going to continue that in September in New York this year. And I think that that's very, very important, where we're doing in the international organizations that are monitoring that. I think that's also essential. And here in Romania, we are supporters of integrating more, for example, the information that we're having from our port, from our naval monitoring information, because I think, especially when we look at the shadow fleet, for example, or the illegal commercial flows that are happening across the seas, or even the interferences with the undersea infrastructure. I think here it makes a lot of sense that we share more of the information that we're having. And also one last thing, I think here, something that we've discussed while putting forward the sanction package, but it wasn't so high on the agenda, so maybe it's worth mentioning, that when you talk about insurance, for example, of very old ships or the shadow fleet, there's also a component there, an indirect component there about the environment. Because if we have ships that are too old, that do not respect any criteria, used even, for example, to move oil outside the territorial waters from ship to ship, all those create huge risks to the biodiversity and the environment itself. And I think that's also something that makes sense once we put it in the sanction package and we find better instruments of insurance, of monitoring, of stopping these shadow fleets to get to land and to be able to create a commercial incentive for them to continue. We need to continue that in the future also from an environment and sustainability perspective.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and the dark fleet poses lots of layered challenges in that regard. I think with that, we are actually at time. So thank you all to our audience in the room and online. And of course, thank you so much, Minister, for coming and joining us.
It was an honor to be here today.
Please join me in thanking the Minister.